When was the last time you were sitting around a table or perhaps and you were really, really hungry and you thought to yourself, well, if I want to eat something, I better go out and hunt it. Or if I want that berry, I better go out and find it and pick it. Well, chances are you really don't have to do that. You may actually just go to a supermarket and purchase what you want to eat. Or go to a butcher and buy that piece of meat that you're really interested in eating. Well, the predecessor to all that was the Neolithic Revolution, which is when humans stopped hunting and gathering as a full profession. Well, today we're going to be trying to answer the lesson question of how did human life change as a result of the Neolithic Revolution? Let's go ahead and get started. Well, to learn about the Neolithic Revolution and its impact, we need to break it down into three separate parts. First, we need to describe early migration around the world. Second, we need to identify the characteristics of hunter-gatherer societies. Third, we need to explain how the Neolithic Revolution changed human societies. But before we do any of that, let's take a look at your words to know. Now, the green word on the screen, this is your academic word, one that you'll see throughout this course, and that word is civilization. Now, the purple words, these are your domain-specific, or words you're really going to see throughout this lesson. Those words are domesticate, hunter-gatherers, Neolithic Revolution, nomad, and pastoralism. Make sure you keep a lookout for these words as we're going through this lesson. All right, if you take a look at the lesson question at the top of the screen, it says, how did human life change as a result of the Neolithic Revolution? Well, to answer that question, we first need to look at human migration, about how human life originated. Many scientists believe it originated in Africa, and gradually over thousands of years, they moved out of Africa. In the second part, we need to look at how those early humans, most of them were hunter and gatherer societies. And gradually those societies became settlements. And finally, in the third part, we're going to look at how those settlements became new civilizations. Well, how you spend your day is radically different from how humans spent their days thousands of years ago. Now, humans throughout history have faced the question of how to use their time. And early humans, getting food was the major focus of their daily life. They were either hunting food or they were gathering things like roots or berries. And finding new ways of getting food helped to transform human life. Well, we're going to be looking at something that happened 10,000 years ago that drastically transformed human life. But before we do that, let's take a look at where human life began and how humans migrated around the world. All right, scholars, go ahead and take a look at the top of the screen and you will see the lesson question. It says, how did human life change as a result of the Neolithic Revolution? Well, to begin to answer that question, this first part is going to focus on human migration. So let's go ahead and get started with this first part. Now, many scientists, such as anthropologists who study human cultures and archaeologists who study human artifacts, believe that the earliest human beings may have originated in Africa. Well, why do they think that? Well, if you take a look at this picture here, this is the Leakey family. Now, they were very famous scientists, and they were doing an archaeological dig in Ethiopia, which is a country in Africa. Well, on that archaeological dig, which you can see them doing here, they found an ancient fossil, which was dated to 3.2 million years ago, and they named that fossil Lucy. So you can see 3.2 million years ago, they found human remains in Ethiopia. Another archaeological dig found another fossil, which was named Ardi, and this one was dated to 4.4 million years ago. So you can see, because the oldest fossils have been found in Africa, many scientists believe that life originated in Africa. And they also believe that many humans lived on the earth for over 4 million years, and they developed into Homo sapiens about 200,000 to 150,000 years ago. Well, obviously, life did not stay in Africa. You find people all over the world. Well, if you take a look at this map here, this is Africa here. And you can see that around 200,000 years ago, remember, CA means circa, human life began to shift or migrate or move out of Africa. So life, many scientists believe, began in Africa, and humans began to migrate around the world. The darker green is where humans began to migrate into modern-day Saudi Arabia around 100,000 years ago, or into West Africa about 100,000 years ago. They gradually began to migrate into Europe about 40,000 years ago. You can see the arrows there. So you can see they started in Africa, moved into Southeast Asia, and then they gradually moved into North and further into South America. Now you may be asking yourself, well, wait a second, isn't there water separating Asia and North America? How did they walk on water? What's going on here? Well, let me answer that question for you about spreading around the globe. Now, the most recent ice age occurred around 10,000 years ago. Now, when I'm talking about this ice age, I'm not talking about ice just during the winter. During this time, there was ice all the way down into into Asia and into Alaska and into North America, much more than there is now. And actually, many scientists believe that a land bridge or an ice bridge connected Asia to North America, where humans, they actually did not have to walk on water. What they did do is they just walked across the ice and gradually moved into North America and then into South America. So this obviously contributed to human migration around the globe. Now, there are some theories that say, well, we think that humans developed independently. They developed in North America independently, from Africa independently. But that one holds a little less credence than the one we're speaking about now. So as humans migrated around the globe and over thousands of years, humans developed different physical traits in different parts of the world. That's why you and I, we may look so much different from each other. So the big takeaway here is that many scientists believe that life began in Africa, and gradually over thousands and thousands of years, humans migrated around the world. That's why you can find humans on every single continent. Well, great job, scholars. You just finished the first part of the lesson. On to the second part. But before we move on, let's take a look at that lesson question, which is at the top of the screen. It says, how did human life change as a result of the Neolithic Revolution? Now, recall in the first part, we talked about human migration, how many scientists believe that life started in Africa, and gradually, over thousands of years, humans migrated out of Africa and populated the rest of the world. Well, in this second part, we're going to look at the beginning of hunter-gatherer societies. So let's go ahead and get started with the second part. Let's begin by looking at what life was like during the Paleolithic period. Now, when I say the Paleolithic period, I'm talking about times about 15,000 years ago. And wherever early humans lived, they lived in a similar way. They were, 1, nomads, and 2, hunter-gatherers. Let's take a look at nomads first. So human beings who move from place to place in search of food. That's what we're talking about when I say nomads. Hunter-gatherers, these are humans who obtain food by hunting and gathering wild food sources. This could be a herd of buffalo, or it could be a patch of wild berries. That's what we're talking about there. Let's take a closer look at nomads, and specifically the Nomadic Society. Now, the constant search for food, they shaped hunter and gatherer life in a number of ways. 1, the communities, they were very small. Remember, they only have enough food as of what they can hunt or what they can gather. So the communities were small because there was not a lot of food to go around. 2, groups, they moved frequently. Think about, if they have a spear and they're hunting a buffalo and they throw the spear at the buffalo but it misses, that buffalo is going to run off and the herd of buffalo will run off too. Consequently, the animals will run off and the humans will have to chase them. So they're constantly on the move. 3, possessions, they were very few, only what could be carried. Remember, they're hunting or they're gathering and they're constantly moving, so it doesn't make sense to have a huge amount of possessions with you. And 4th, they all work to find food and other items needed for survival. And you can see an example of perhaps one of the animals that were hunted. If you look closely, this is a picture of a wild buffalo, and it was drawn or painted in a cave in France. So you can see that even when they're hunting and gathering, early humans, they would still draw what they were hunting. So this is sort of an idea of what life was like during the Paleolithic period. All right, let's take a look at what food was eaten, or what was on the menu during the Paleolithic period. Well, early humans, they ate many different types of food, and this depended upon their local geography. Now, they hunted large animals, such as mammoth, which you can see on the screen here. Now, they would use all parts of the mammoth. They would use the fur for either clothing or for shelter. They could use the tusks for weapons or to help them build a shelter. And obviously, they would use all the meat from the mammoth to eat. In addition, they would also gather local plants, berries, or roots that were in their local geography. In addition, if they lived by the coast, they would catch fish, they would gather shellfish, and sometimes they would also hunt small game as well. Now, all this depended upon their geography. So you see that geography played a very important role in the life of early humans. And early hunter-gatherers, they would adapt to the local conditions in a number of ways. So one, the climate and environment affected the food they ate. Like we were talking about earlier, if mammoths lived in your area, you would perhaps hunt them. If they didn't, you obviously would not hunt them. It would affect the clothing. If you lived in a very cold area, you would depend upon very robust, heavy clothing to keep you warm. It also depended on your housing choices. Again, if you lived in that cold area, you would want shelter that was very sealed off and could be kept extremely warm. Now, two, groups on the coast, they usually had more food and they moved less. The reason being is that most of them were fishermen. And so instead of going out and hunting or throwing a spear at an animal and that animal running off and you chasing it or hunting it, you would just go out, you would go fishing, so you did not have to move as much. And third and final, distinct cultures developed because of this. You would have a culture that lived on the coast would be much different from a culture that lived in the interior. Let's take a little bit closer look at culture and technology. Now, many humans during this time, they made many great advancements in a number of ways. One, they developed ways to create fire. Now, this is critical because if you can create fire, you can, one, cook meals, two, you have a better chance of staying warm, and three, you're able to scare away animals that may be trying to hunt you. The second thing is that they made tools out of rock, out of wood, and out of bone as well, where at the very beginning they may just sharpen a spear and use that to stab at an animal. Now they could make a spear, they could add a sharp rock that has been sharpened up, and the spear is much more lethal and much stronger. In addition, they could use bone to make needles, or they could use wood and other rocks to make knives as well. Now third, in addition, they developed language, which is critical when you're hunting. They developed art, which you can see on the screen here. This is a cave painting in Spain. And they also developed music as well. However, as time went by, there soon became many changes to the Paleolithic world. And they began around 10,000 years ago when the climate began to change. And this really impacted early humans. So the climate, it was getting warmer. Remember, before this time, it was the Ice Age. And ice actually connected Asia to North America. They would walk across the ice through the ice bridge. Well, as the temperature gets warmer, that ice is going to melt, and it's going to isolate North America from Asia. So the cultures will be isolated and further develop very distinct cultures. In addition, large prey animals were becoming extinct. An example is the woolly mammoth. It became extinct during this time period. You cannot find woolly mammoths anymore unless it's a skeleton like you see on the screen here. So the big takeaway here is that geography played a very important role in the life of early humans. Well, great job, scholars. You finished the second part of the lesson. On to the last part. But before we move on, as we've always done, let's take a look at that lesson question, which is at the top of the screen. It says, how did human life change as a result of the Neolithic Revolution? Now, recall from the first part, we talked about human migration, how many scientists believe that life originated in Africa, and over thousands of years, humans migrated out of Africa and populated the rest of the world. And in the second part, we talked about hunter-gatherer societies, talking about what type of food these hunter-gatherers hunted, as well as what type of food they gathered. And we learned how geography played a very significant role in their life. Now, in this third part, we're going to be looking at the new civilizations that developed over thousands of years. So let's go ahead and get started with this third part. A huge change in human history occurred around 12,000 years ago, and that change was called the Neolithic Revolution. And it's also called the Agricultural Revolution, because during this time period, people began to gather and plant seeds and grow crops. That was a huge change from during the Paleolithic period, where people would migrate around the world in search for roots or for berries or things that they could gather. Now, they began to take those seeds, put them in the ground, and they began to grow their own crops. No more did they have to go out and search for them. In addition, people began to domesticate animals. You can see an example of domesticating animals here, of this dog as well as the bull. Now, raising livestock and herd animals for human use is called pastoralism. And this was huge, and it really helped humans, not only for the food source, because these animals could be domesticated and kept pinned in, but also, if you look at this bull right here, it can also be used for carrying as well. Now, this agricultural revolution, it didn't occur all around at the exact same time. It took place over thousands and thousands of years, and it occurred independently in many places around the globe. You can see here in North America, here in Europe, here in sub-Saharan Africa. But you can also notice the time differences, where in North America, it started around 3000 BCE, but in Southeast Asia, it started around 5000 BCE. Now, these areas of agriculture, these are known as agricultural hearths, and they were known for that because they had excellent soil as well as rivers that would allow for the production, for the growth of crops. Now, there are many different causes of the Neolithic Revolution. The first, and possibly the most important, was that climate had eliminated the old food sources. So humans, they had to adapt over thousands of years. Remember that. They didn't just wake up one day and think, you know what, I'm tired of hunting. I'm going to domesticate animals. No. It was a general process that took a very long time. Now, other changes that were occurring is that populations, they were growing, resulting in the new need for a larger food surplus. If you have more people, you have more mouths to feed. Now, 3, societies, they were growing more complex. Recall that during the Paleolithic period, people had 2 professions, if you will. They were either a hunter or they were a gatherer. Now they didn't just need to focus on just hunting or just gathering. They could focus on other things because that farming and the domestication of animals led to a larger food supply. So you had different groups. You had priests, you maybe had soldiers, you had potters, you had people who could make this vase over here. And new tools as well made food production, food collection, and food storage easier. So the big takeaway here is that the Neolithic Revolution marked a dramatic change in human history, and it paved the way for the creation of the first ever civilizations. Now let's take a look at cause and effect, and this will really help you understand how all of these things that are happening and what they did and how they led to something else. What was the cause and effect? So on the left, you have the causes of why something happened, and on the right, you have the effect of what happened as a result. So follow along with me. New technologies and climate changes occurred. The effect of that is that people began to farm, starting the Neolithic Revolution. Now this effect then becomes the cause. So people begin to farm. The effect of that is people can store the food surplus. This effect becomes the cause. People store the food surplus, and communities grow larger. Because communities are growing larger, specialization of labor occurs. Because specialization of labor occurs, complex civilizations develop. So you can see the cause and the effect of it, and how that relates to each other. But let's pay special attention to specialization. Now here are just some of the examples of the specialized roles people began to fill. One is that people began inventing new tools and technologies. 2, they began making items needed for the community, such as tools, which you can see on the screen here, a vase, which we saw earlier in the lesson. So these are just some examples of that. 3, governing communities. You began to have rulers and people who were ruled by them. 4, providing religious leadership. You begin to see priests develop here as well. And 5, serving in the military. You, for the first time, began to see soldiers as well. But in addition to all this, there are massive population increases that are taking place. Now, the Neolithic Revolution was responsible for dramatic population increase, where by the year 3000 BCE, remember that is 3,000 years before year 0, the global population is estimated at 75 million people. because you have so many people, there's a rise of civilizations. You can see an example of an early civilization of Mohenjo-Daro, which is in India. So civilization, that's a society of the high level of achievement. So you've got to have a few of these things to be called a civilization. For example, you must have a complex government and religion. You also must have different social classes, like kings or queens and servants and soldiers, those different social classes. You also need advanced art and buildings. And finally, you need writing and record keeping as well, a system of writing. So the big takeaway here is that gradually over thousands of years, society began to change. The population grew, and they were able to specialize in different things, and civilizations grew out of that. So you can see how the Neolithic Revolution was the cause, and the effect of the Neolithic Revolution was the rise of civilizations. Now remember, another tool that historians use to help put together all the information you're looking at is by looking at a timeline, which you can see here. And this is the Neolithic timeline. Let's start on the far left, where 60,000 BCE, that's when humans began to migrate or move out of Africa around the world. And it was during this time period, between 2 million and 10,000 BCE, was the Paleolithic era. Now the huge change happened around 10,000 BCE, where the domestication of animals began 1,000 years later, and agriculture was established 1,000 years after that. And this entire time period, from 10,000 BCE to about 5,000 BCE, is called the Neolithic Revolution. So just try to keep this timeline in mind as we're studying this key time in history.